I and we are so happy to be able to be with you here today. It's the last day of our Climate Fest. Thank you for joining sessions in the Climate Fest. We hope there are other sessions that you've been to and that you've enjoyed them. This session is going to overlap at the end of it with a group of teens from the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. If you're inspired, you can go over from here to there. But for now, welcome to this session. And I want to start in a funny way with GameStop. Put your hands up if you've heard of GameStop. And put your hands up if you've followed a little bit some of the craziness that's been happening in the, yes. So I just want to note that we don't exactly know what the relationship is between social cohesion and progressive taxation. But it's very striking that both in Britain and the United States in the 1950s, there was relatively strong social cohesion and there was relatively strong progressive taxation. And what's been happening around GameStop in the last week is kind of crazy in many different ways. It's attacked it's brought an enormous amount of attention to it. But at some level, one of the things that you can see going on, as it were, behind the radar, except now we can actually read these things, is a whole group of people who are buying stock in this thing, GameStop, not merely or potentially not even to make money, because they really think that by doing so, they're screwing, quote unquote, the hedge funds. And I just want to note, regardless in a sense of the details of it, it's not only fascinating to observe this, but it is also in a sense disturbing. It's also very clearly revealing a fracture in our society. Regardless of the specific questions about GameStop, hedge funds, how markets should function, there is something that's being revealed, and not for the first time, about inequality in society. Meanwhile, this year has also been the year of COVID. It's been the year of, as it were, our involuntary rest. And we have all seen, regardless of how we came into it, that actually slowing down and having things stop and having people lose jobs and lose money is hard. It's not easy. And at the same time, there are certain things that are good about slowing down. And so both of those two things are indirectly a frame for being here today and why I'm so excited to welcome you. My name's Nigel Savage. I'm CEO of Chazon. And Chazon for a long time has been trying to turn the Jewish community outwards to help create a more sustainable world for everybody. There is no one way to do that. Some of that is by leveraging institutions. We have a Chazon Seal of Sustainability and other programs. Some of it is about leadership. We have our Adama program, our Jewish Youth Climate Movement, other things. And part of it is about engaging with Jewish thought. One of the things that we've been really excited to do has been to take Jewish tradition and take it out of a small box and say, what happens when we point Jewish tradition to some of the largest issues of our time? And conversely, when we take some of the largest issues of our time and actually look freshly at the tradition, what do we learn? And that's how it is that we get to Shmita, a variety of provisions in the tradition that are, in my view, helpfully unclear. We know that Shmita happens every 7 years. We have different words for it in the Tanakh. It's Shavi'it, the 7th year. It's Tishmatenu and the Tashta, letting go of things. It's Shabbat Ladonai, Shabbat for God. It's Shabbat Shabbaton, some kind of quintessence of Shabbat, Shabbat Haaretz, and Shmita itself, letting go of. So today we have 4 really amazing panelists and friends. And we have asked each of them to share a little bit of how and why they have been excited and provoked by Shmita in the past. Some of what they've thought about, in some cases what they have done or not done. That's going to be the first of our session. And in the second half, we're going to look forwards to this coming Shmita year, starting this Rosh Hashanah, September the 6th, and this new 7-year Shmita cycle in Jewish life. So we're going to begin, if I may, with Dyonna Ginsburg. Dyonna is a dear friend, is in Jerusalem, runs OLAM together, was previously one of the founders and leaders of B'Maglei Tzedek. Dyonna, you're up, and welcome, Baruch haba.
Nigel, thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here with you and with your colleagues and friends. Nigel has been my mentor and guide in general, but particularly related to all matters Shmita for the last, at least Shmita cycle. So it's really exciting to be here. As Nigel mentions, I am the CEO of OLAM, which is a network of over 50 Jewish and Israeli organizations working in the fields of global service, international development, and humanitarian aid. So the first time that I was exposed to Shmita, the sabbatical year, at least in its expanded sense, was in 2007. I had been living in Israel for about 5 years, and I went to a day-long conference at the Beit Avichai, which is a Jewish cultural center in Jerusalem. And I heard from a variety of speakers ranging from academia to finance to high tech, and it rocked my world because for the first time, I heard people thinking about an ancient notion and trying to breathe new life into it. And as someone who is both halachically observant and a proud Zionist, this was unbelievably exciting for me. And I loved the notion that people were distilling ancient concepts and core components of Shmita and trying to figure out how to translate them into contemporary non-agrarian societies. Fast forward about a year, I had transitioned from the world of Jewish education to the social justice world in Israel and was running an Israeli social change organization and found myself in New York on a fundraising trip precisely when the Bernie Madoff story broke. And I had to make a quick decision. Either I go back to Israel because no one was interested in speaking to me about money, or I repurpose my trip. And I ended up meeting with a lot of kindred spirits, social justice activists in the North American Jewish community, and came back with a very strong sense that there was a tremendous amount in common between those I knew in Israel and those who were doing that work abroad. And to the credit of a particular funder, the UJ Federation of New York, I spoke to them about this idea and I said, what would it look like if there would be a network of Jewish, at that point in time, I said social justice activists from around the world? And they said, that's a great idea. You need to find partners. And oh, by the way, we fund a lot of environmental organizations. You should subsume that in that work. And Nigel and I, as well as many others, cooked up an idea for a network. And I must say that in the first several years, there was something that didn't quite fit. Some of the Israeli social change activists who are working on human rights and refugees and educational reform were in the same room with leaders in the Jewish food movement or farmers. And while people loved being together, we weren't quite sure why everybody belonged in the same room until 2014. When we had a conference in London, the last Shmita year, on the notion of Shmita. And all of a sudden, I had a eureka moment where I realized that there was this conceptual frame, namely Shmita, that brought together this motley crew of social change activists, environmental activists, economists, Jewish thought leaders, and it made sense for everybody to be around the same room. And I'll just end off by saying that the term sustainable development only came into use in about 1987. But the concept of the overlapping Venn diagram between economics, society, and the environment is something that is as old as Shmita itself. Because embedded within the Shmita notion is the lands lying fallow, the environment, debt relief, so economics. You also have, at the end of the Shmita year, immediately afterwards, everybody coming together in a communal celebration of the Torah, Hakel. And every 7 Shmita cycles, you have the return of the land to its original owners and the freeing of slaves. And so for me, that was really a tremendous moment. And that entire year, I got to be witness to many of the amazing initiatives you'll hear about from our other panelists, and mostly the connector between those in Israel and those around the world doing this work.
Dyonna, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm happy now to turn to Einat Kramer. And I will say to everybody that all four of our panelists are friends and colleagues and teachers of mine. And truthfully, each one of them is a person that I really look up to and respect. We all of us struggle to figure out what does it mean to walk the walk in different ways. But I want to say in relationship to Shmita, Einat is one of the people who really literally walk the walk. And Einat is one of the founders and leaders of Teva Ivri, one of the young Israeli environmental organizations. And Einat, I want to welcome you and invite you to tell us, as well as everything else, about walking the walk 7 years ago.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nigel. I also was in this Siach conference and I was inspired by Shmita. And why wouldn't I? When we talked about Shmita, like, I don't know, it was 10 years ago in this Siach conference, I remember one phrase from Vayikra. I will say it in Hebrew and then I will explain it in English. והייתה שבת הארץ לכם לאוכלה, לך, לעבדך, לשכירך ואת תושבך גרים ממך, ולבהמתך ולחיה אשר בארצך תהיה כל את שבועתה לאכול. This phrase is talking about the Shabbat table of the land, like והייתה שבת הארץ. And I had this image in my eyes of like Shabbat table, which is everybody are included around the table. The people, your family, people who doesn't have any money and they come and eat with you, the people who works for you, the people who are not from your same people, but they just come around, the animals that works for you and the animals in the field. Everybody is included. Everybody is around this table. And this idea, when we start to learn them, just made me so much inspired that I had this feeling that it must inspire everybody. Like Dyonna said, like everybody should be invited to sit around the table and say what is going to happen around the table of this Shmita year in Israel. So we made the Israeli Shmita Initiative. It was like a platform of many organizations, finance, high-tech, social justice, education, environmental organization. And we all sat together and start thinking, how is Shmita inspiring us? How are we going to do Shmita-related projects? And we start talking about it, and we start making conferences that we're talking about it, and then we made small groups, local groups, and then projects start to happen. We had some very big projects, like we had a huge finance recovery program. The people that try to manage their budget were helped by volunteers and got some money to help themselves to go back to normal society. We have very small projects. Many people just got vegetarian, because they said, if I'm going to sit around this table of the land, of Shabbat of the land, with the animals, they are not supposed to be on the table. They are supposed to sit with me. Many people work less and start to study in the university or hike around the Israel Trail. There were a huge amount of projects, and for each and every project, we talked about it, we published about it in the newspaper, we made it a conversation, so the grassroots will rise more and more and more. I will do a screen share, and I will show you. Okay, this is a book of all the projects that happened. Not all the projects, 49 projects, because 7 and 7, it's kind of 49. And I wanted to share, we have even one page about America, American dream of Shmita. Even though if we should really write it, we should have like a huge book, like the Bible, about everything that happened here. But I wanted to share with you my own project that is over here, because I didn't want only to be the one who tell people, come on, do projects, it's going to be great fun for you, and then sit at home and seeing everybody enjoying life. So I had my own project. I will show you 1 minute of a movie that we made about it. Enjoy. הגענו לאיזושהי הבנה שהנושא הזה של שמיטה בתור זמן של עצירה, התבוננות פנימה, הסתכלות אחרת על האדמה, על הסביבה, על מה שקורה איתנו, איזשהו קצת שאר רוח, ובעיקר הזכרות בכל החלומות שלנו, שבשש שנות המרוץ כמעט ועבדו, ועכשיו זה הזמן לתפוס אותם, הוא צריך גם מרחב משלו, לא מספיק שנדבר אותו, צריכים גם לאפשר אותו. ואז באנו רעיון, להקים אוהל, ועם האוהל הזה לנדוד בארץ. ושהאוהל הזה עצמו יהיה מרחב של שמיטה.
וגם אם לא נצליח לעשות את השמיטה האידיאלית כמו שהיא צריכה להיות, אז אנחנו נעשה את זה בכל מיני פעילויות של השמיטה הישראלית, ונקבל קצת טעימות מהגן עדן, קצת יותר שוויוני, קצת יותר חברה צודקת, קצת פחות מרוץ אחרי החומר, אחרי החמדנות.
So, for a whole year, I spent 1 week in every month in another spot in Israel, from south to north. And in each place, we opened the tent, and there was like a free library and free food for everybody. And everybody who came and sit with us, we said to him, what is your dreams? What is your social dream? What is your environmental dream? What are you going to do for this dream? How can we work together for this dream? And it was 12 months, 12 weeks in the road with my family. Now in the Corona days, I cannot believe I did it. Like every place, so many people, I can be like a walking virus from place to place. And I think that this move of me, this trail around that Shmita year, is the thing that brought me now to this panel, who keep me optimistic for the next Shmita year, to see the people, how much they want to connect to the place and to their society. Thank you, Nigel, for being with me.
Thank you, Einat. Thank you so much. So we're going to go now to Yakim and Nella. And I think that we're really happy, it's not accidental that 3 of the 4 panelists here this afternoon are in Israel, because Shmita, in a sense, begins in the land of Israel. And that feels good and appropriate. And it's slightly different in Israel than it is in Chutz La'aretz, in the rest of the world. And at the same time, most of us watching this are in the United States. And Yakir has been one of the key leaders in the last 10 or 15 years in bringing a physically embodied Judaism, Jewish tradition, to life in the United States in the 21st century. And Yakir, I'm happy to hand over to you for you to say a little bit about what Shmita means to you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Dyonna, Einat, Daniel, it's so good to be together with you. And just seeing that Shmita tent, Einat, just ha'olam haba. I mean, really, you know, such holy work. And I really, really appreciate the hearkening back to Siach, not just the London experience, but I remember the first Siach gathering at Isabella Friedman as a truly transformative experience for me and our movement across the Jewish world. And when we talk about Achdut and Jewish peoplehood, I think that work is some of the most powerful work I've seen, building coalitions across continents through our shared values. And I think that's so much what Shmita is about. I would say this is my 3rd Shmita year that I've been aware of and paying attention and inspired by, knowing that Shmita is a thing. I am the CEO of the Pearlstone Center just outside of Baltimore. We are a Jewish retreat center and Jaffe Education Center, Jewish outdoor food farming and environmental education center, immersive retreats, organic farming, community sustainability initiatives on 180 acres outside of Baltimore, impacting over 20,000 people a year. And I'm also proud to be a board member of Chazon and a trained Teva educator, and really inspired by my time at Isabel Friedman. And that's when I first encountered Shmita as a Teva educator, and then really inspired by my dear friend and teacher, Nati Passau of the Jewish Farm School at a Jewish food conference, I believe, Nigel, 2007, 2008, somewhere around then, when he gave a keynote, and Nigel invited him to give a keynote to really put this on the map of a movement that was really ripe for it. And I think that really charted a course in many ways of where we have come to today. I was so just mind blown about it that we went back and, you know, we were doing Kayam Farm Beit Midrash, which was like an Eco Limud conference dedicated to Torah study on ancient texts and all the way up into a contemporary learning on land, agriculture, and sustainability. And one year we devoted that entire weekend of study to Shmita. And again, this is in Baltimore, not in Israel, and really trying to say, what are we inspired by? We understand we are not halakhically obligated to follow this law, and we're not trying to, but the values of Shmita are so important. So what does that mean for us as Jewish people everywhere? And one of the things we did in that weekend was we created a bonus day after the weekend for people who wanted to stay and talk about how, if we think about Shmita as a long-term food system and food justice sort of related tool and piece of legislation, the Farm Bill comes to mind in America. And we actually had a whole day of study after studying Shmita, then looking at the Farm Bill. And then we actually went into DC and lobbied on the Farm Bill and sort of trying to take action in ways that are inspired by the structure and the values underlying Shmita. We started planning several years in advance last time for the last Shmita year. And on a personal note, I have to share that we actually were pregnant at the time and due in the early part of the Shmita year. And the SIAC listserv became a place for me to say, who has good Shmita baby names? And we got a bunch of names, and our third son was born on the 7th day of Tishrei, the 7th month of the 7th year. And I was reading Chazon's translation, Rabbi Yedidya Sinclair's translation of Rav Kook's Shabbat HaAretz, the introduction. So blown away by that as we were in the early stages of labor. I was finishing it, then I was totally present for my wife. And we named our son Yovel Chai. So we're pretty into Shmita in our home. And when I think about like, why is that, Rabbi David Seidenberg of neochassid.org has really inspired me in saying, well, why is Shmita one of the only laws that is named in Bahar? Like, why is Shmita talked about as given over on the mountain? There are so many other mitzvot. Why Shmita? And his teaching is that because Shmita represents a really pinnacle of the Torah paradigm, like an aspirational, like if we put together all our values, our mitzvot, and really create a just and sustainable society, we could get to a place where Shmita is possible. So to me, it has this sort of overarching, all-inclusive nature to it. And then there are these two teachings that are probably my two favorite. There are so many favorite Shmita teachings, but at least on the shorter end, Rav Kook in Shabbat HaAretz says, what Shabbat achieves regarding the individual, Shmita achieves regarding the nation as a whole. And if we just think about like the sense of what Shabbat can do for us as individuals and families, or the teaching that more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. So what does that mean if we put a Shmita lens and a national lens on what is that possible for us as a nation? And then taking that a step further, my other favorite, or at least I find one of the most powerful Shmita teachings is in Pirkei Avot, where on a list of several other things that bring exile upon the world, it names exile comes upon the world on account of the failure to observe the Shmita. What does that mean? What does it mean to think about exile upon the world? And what does it mean for Shmita to be redeeming in that way? So, we did a lot of things last time. We actually did put the land in cover crop. We created a new 7-year vision for our farm. We took a hiatus from several programs, and we actually gave all our staff Shmita days, which were service volunteer days, additional time off, encouraging people to go volunteer in local organizations to just help, create a more just and sustainable society. And I have said to several friends and community members, to me, there is some Shmita energy in what's happening now. Shmita, in some aspects, Shmita came early, and in some aspects not. So I think there's a lot to dig into here, and I'm really honored to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, Kia, thank you for that. And let me say before we go to Daniel, so many people who are on the screen are people who are rabbis and organizational leaders. And as you were talking there about Shmita for the individual and Shmita for the state or for the nation, between those two, there is also Shmita for the institution. And in the same way that Dyonna inspired us by thinking about the way that Shmita brought together Israeli, European, and American environmental social justice leaders. And Einat inspired us to think about, what would it mean for me personally to go somewhere and open a tent and engage with people that I don't normally engage with during the Shmita year. And Yakir has now put it on the agenda at those different levels. Really, truly, every one of us, I'd said to our panelists privately, this session is to get all of us excited all over again, and we hope everybody else will get excited too. So you should be scribbling notes to yourselves right now of things that you might want to do or not do for yourself, your family, your community, Jewish people, the world. With that, Daniel is a dear friend who's crossed through many different worlds: law, public service, diplomacy, education. Daniel was one of the first people of my acquaintance to write about Shmita when he was on a sabbatical in the United States, what is now approaching 3 Shmita cycles ago. Daniel, I'm super happy to welcome you to add whatever different sorts of things you would like to add to what we have already heard. Baruch haba. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And it really is wonderful to be here. And it turns out it's actually a reunion. It's a Schmitta reunion, because just in our pre-discussion, it turned out that everybody that's on the panel here was actually together 7 years ago, the previous Shmita, at an incredible event that was taking place in London. So it's wonderful to be back. And it's a reminder to me that, and what Nigel just said, how many Shmitot it's turned out that I've actually spent outside Israel. It just as a curiosity. The last Shmita I was actually in London. Nigel mentioned that I'd spent a Shmita on sabbatical, on Shabbaton in the United States. But maybe to make up for that, the first year that I spent in Israel was actually Shmita. And I was in yeshiva at the time, and it was very confusing to me, because the thing that I knew at the time was if you're ever invited to visit an Orthodox family, say for Shabbat, the safe thing to bring them is either fruit or flowers. And that year really messed me up, because it turns out that in Shmita year, the worst thing to bring somebody is fruit or flowers, because there's so many different interpretations and so on. But in terms of connecting more deeply with Shmita, I think for me it's happened in two phases. On one level, it's very, very much tied with the idea of coming to Israel and this idea of rootedness. And I actually think, I know we'll speak about it later, but I think it's so interesting that you are doing a project that relates to creativity, to art, because I think the two are actually very, very deeply related. You know, there's this extraordinary psalm that everybody knows, at least they know the beginning of, that talks about the Babylonian exile. It begins, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept. And then it goes on and it says what the Israelites did as they were about to go into exile, which was that they hung up their harps and their lyres on the willow trees in the middle of the river. And then the psalm goes on, and you have these Babylonian captors saying to the Israelites, "Sing us one of your songs of Zion." And they say, we can't sing them. There's a certain type of creativity that is connected to the land. If you pull us away from the land, we can't sing those songs. And then come these very famous lines that everybody knows. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its cunning, let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. And I think we usually think about that, about losing our strength, losing our voice metaphorically. But actually, if you see it in the psalm, it's a very, very, the pshat, the simple interpretation is very, very physical. It's simply talking about the hand that plays the harp and the tongue that sings. If I am disconnected from Jerusalem, I can no longer play my harp. I can no longer sing these songs. And a part of what coming back to Israel is about is not just reconnecting with the land. It's reconnecting with that type of creativity that is imbued with rootedness. Unless we have that connection, there's a certain type of voice that we need to discover. So that, in a sense, was my first layer of connection. But then I spent more years abroad representing Israel. And the second level was seeing how much we have to offer, and that this is a gift of Israel and the Jewish people to the world. And, you know, one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing abroad, our favorite diplomatic event was Friday night Shabbat meals. And you would see the penny drop for political leaders, for religious leaders of other faiths, when they saw that the telephones were off, when they saw so on and so forth. And suddenly you realize, you know, we really do lose sight of the fact that in the United States, where you are, how long ago was it? 150 years that there were people who were working from Christmas Day to Christmas Day without a break. And here we have this extraordinarily radical institution that changed the world. And is there any reason why Shmita, which is so necessary today, and in a sense, you described it before, we're in this period of enforced rest of this year of Corona, but in so many ways, Shmita has the potential to be an anti-Corona. It has the potential to be a healing process for society, both in terms of poverty, in terms of community, and maybe we'll speak about that later on. But it was interesting for me that my first exposure to Shmita, in a sense, was a very parochial national one. And it was through that I sort of came to a realization this is an extraordinary treasure that shouldn't remain a national one. We should become not just startup nation, we should become 7-up nation, in the sense that this is something that we have to share with the world. And it's wonderful to see an event like this.
Daniel, thank you for that. And I want to just add, as you were speaking, I suddenly remembered that Rav Kook had written Shabbat Haaretz, which was about the Shemitah year in 2008, 2009. But 8 years later, B'Tzalel, the art school, opened in Jerusalem, and Rav Kook, with his shtreimel and his tefillin, was a very unlikely speaker at the opening of it. And somewhere on the internet, maybe somebody now can find it, gave a remarkable speech. And the speech that he gave was about the extent to which Jewish tradition prohibited graven images, and that therefore, as it were, Jewish tradition wasn't so fully into the arts as we would now call them. And he was saying to these students at B'Tzalel, these young Jewish Zionists, most of them not religious, this is a form of shlemut, this is a form of wholeness, to re-engage with the fullness of Jewish tradition, the land and art. I do want to say that that is a sort of segue onto what is the second, and we hope the larger half of this session, which is not merely, as it were, to look back, but to look forwards. I will just say in a personal sense, just a few different examples. I, for myself, last time around, and I was very excited by Shmita and saying as a community we should do lots of things, but quite some while before the Shmita year, I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to measure Shmita? I live in a city, I'm not a farmer, I'm not in Israel. Very randomly, I decided that I wasn't going to buy a book for the whole of the Shmita year. Now, as things go, there's no prohibition about buying books in the tradition. In general, as Jews, we don't necessarily think of buying books as a bad thing. Nevertheless, I like books and I like buying books. And Shmita for sure is about slowing the level of commerce. So I decided not only that I wasn't going to buy a book, but that was so stressful to me that 6 months before the Shmita year, I went around my apartment and I took books off the shelf that I might want to read and wrapped them in newspaper, so that if the moment seized me, I would like take them off and be like, oh, I always wanted to read this. Now, what was remarkable was that that stack of books stayed there the whole year. I went the whole year without buying a single book, and I didn't unwrap a single one. It turned out I had enough. I didn't need any more. I actually decided not to buy liquor. It's a longer story, but the miracle, it's like a version of the Hanukkah miracle. The liquor that I had lasted for the whole year of Shmita. At a totally different level, there was a story in the New York Times titled, I'll put a link in later on, Setting Aside a Scholarly Get-Together for the Planet's Sake. And it was December 5th, 2014, 3 months into the Shmita year. Laurie Zoloth, who was president of the American Academy of Religion, gave a speech to 10,000 academics studying all religions, of all religions, saying, this year is the Shmita year in Jewish life. I'm going to challenge all of us, nearly 10,000 of them gathered in San Diego. 7 years from now, let's not do this conference. Crazy idea. Let's not put 10,000 people in planes in the sky. We'll do it by video. And I clipped this thing from the newspaper, put it on my desk. I thought it was fascinating. Who is this woman? Finally, 3 months later, I made a date to speak with her. I said, I wanted to ask you, A, what happened, and B, where you got the idea from. She said, well, first of all, in terms of what happened, she said, they hate me. They cannot wait for my term of office to end. She said, because the sole raison d'etre of the American Academy of Religion is to do this conference, which everybody comes together for and loves. So in saying, let's not do it, it challenged everybody that hated the idea. She said, and in terms of where the idea came from, she said, do you not know? She said, it came from you. I said, how so? I'd never met this woman before. I'd never heard of her. She said, my son, Rabbi Natan Levy, was at the Shmita Summit in London that you did. And he phoned me up and he said, Mom, you're head of the American Academy of Religion. The Shmita year is coming. You got to do something. Now, I share those stories because I want to note none of them is in the Torah. There is nothing in the Torah or even the extension of halakha that is in any way about whether organizations host conferences, whether we do or don't buy books, or whether we do or don't buy bottles of whiskey. And yet in believing that this tradition is rich and wise and speaks to the realities and the complexities of the world that we live in today, I and Laurie, a lot of other people, were trying last time around to figure out how could or should we express it. So I want to go back to the panelists I think I'm actually gonna, Einat, start with you and let you share that other little video if you would like. But I want to go back to the panelists and ask you for your ideas or suggestions for yourselves or for all the rest of us. And I'm also going to start to queue up everybody who is joining us here, because as we go through this round, I'm certainly going to invite people to offer your own questions or your own suggestions. But Einat, over to you.
Okay, Ahla, thank you. Again, I will show a short movie. It was our promotion Shmita movie in the last Shmita, and afterward I will say why I will not advise anything that is on this movie. But let's see it, it's a nice one.
תכירו את ערן. ערן האצן. כבר שנים שערן מתייצב מדי בוקר על קו המרוץ. מרוץ החיים. ערן הוא איש משפחה למופת. בכל בוקר הוא מכין עם שמרית, אשתו האצנית, ארוחות 10 לשלושת ילדיהם הקטנים. בזמן ששמרית פוצחת ממרוץ משלה, ערן ממהר להקפיץ את הקטן אל גן הילדים בטרם ייסגר השער. כך בכל בוקר ערן מצליח לאחר רק מעט לעבודה. ערן עובד ועובד, ותוך כדי עבודה גם חוטף משהו לארוחת צהריים. הוא ממשיך בסערה בדרכו. אחת לשנה, ערן יוצא לשירות מילואים ממושך. הוא לא שוכח לטלפן הביתה לספר שהכל בסדר. ולנסות לפייס את הבוס שנמאס לו שרק לערן קוראים למילואים. בטרם ייסגר הבנק, עוד הספיק לשכנע את ריקי המנהלת לאשר לו שוב את לאסוף את הילדים מהחוגים כי השערה זה חשוב, לנשק בחטף את שמרית כי האהבה זה חשוב, להשליך את הפלסטיק על המחזורית כי סביבה זה מאוד חשוב, ולהתייצב במכון הכושר, כי העיקר הבריאות אתם יודעים. לערן האצן שלנו אין רגע דל, אין לו זמן לקחת אוויר, אין לו רגע אחד לעצור ולנשום. ואולי, ערן יגלה שאפשר אחרת. לפחות אחת ל7 שנים.
שנת השמיטה היא ההזדמנות של כולנו לעצור ולבחור מחדש ברוח, במשפחה ובסביבה.
תיכנסו לאתר שמיטה או חפשו אותנו בפייסבוק שמיטה ישראלית והצטרפו גם אתם לשינוי כללי המשחק של מרוץ החיים.
So this was a movie and as you see it was all about let's stop, let's rest, let's stop to be in the race of life. Don't be like Iran, the runner that doesn't have any time for his own life because all the time he's in a run from this place to another, and take a year of chill, of family, spirit, etc., etc. So as everybody feel, I'm sure, around the globe, this is not a situation now. We are not running anywhere. We are sitting at home and many things are happening. And this is not the time, I think, to say people, this is sabbatical year, let's take a year off, let's take a year of rest, let's take a year at home with my family, thinking about what hobbies I would like to have. To say more than this, I mean, when the corona has started, I had this feeling that the Shmita year is coming, like my dream is coming true. I felt everybody was in a catastrophe and I was in utopia. Yes, everybody will go back home and we'll walk in the garden and we will spend time with kids and build community. And then time passed on and it's not an utopia, not at all, I have to say. But it gave me a lot of thinking about what did the real Shmita, like if the sabbatic, when it happened in Israel at the ancient time, was it in utopia? And the answer was the only way they could survive it, this way of not working and everybody sharing the wealth, etc., is by building a very, very strong community, a very strong society that established about tzedek and tzedakah, about justice and about grace and giving to each other, a community where people know each other and are willing to open their door for each other. And I have to say that if I see now this movie, this short movie, I say, no, I'm not looking for the stop and the rest and the chill, but I'm looking for this Shmita year, for a year of everything else we saw in the movie. The movie was in my village. You saw there my children. The children of Iran is mine. The falafel seller is my father. All the actors are my neighbors. It took a day off of work to come and do whatever I ask them because I ask them, not because they're Shmita activists. And this is what I would suggest for this Shmita year, to find a way to strengthen the community. There is one very pragmatic, very practical, spiritual is good, but my idea is not to be spiritual, to be very pragmatic and practical about what is my community needing this day to become more strong, to be stronger. I can give like one pragmatic idea that we are doing now in Israel. It's called Shat Shmita, like a Shmita hour instead of Shmita year. And each one said what is going to bring like 1 hour a week, a month, whatever he can give to the society in something that he knows how to do. And it's like an app. And if I can make a cake once a week, people can write themselves and I will bring them the cake once a week or give them tax advisement or whatever. So this is like one practical idea on the community where you live, not around the whole country or universe. I hope that that's way the Shmita, that's how the Shmita will be a cure for the corona and not just like another year happening after the disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Einat. Let me just add as I go in any combination, Dyonna, Yakir, Daniel, but I want to just say to everybody that one of the things that I think is really fascinating about Shmita is offering it both as a frame in time and, as it were, the content of that frame. So note that on the one hand, everything in Jewish life runs on Jewish time, except for Shmita. In other words, in any Jewish institution, Tuesday is different from Shabbat. Hanukkah is different than Pesach. Pesach is different than Yom Kippur. No Jewish institution of any sort would dream of programming normal life on Yom Kippur or treating it as a Tuesday if Yom Kippur fell on a Tuesday. And so separately from the content of it, we, all of us, regardless of the institutions that we're involved in, have the opportunity to say, how do I want to use the time in my institution between now and the start of the Shmita year, this Rosh Hashanah, as it were, to prepare for that year? And then in what way will my institution be different that year from the other 6 years of the cycle, including potentially looking back on the last 6 years and looking forward on the next 7. And that's then how we come to something like Einat said. Totally coincidentally to this session, I was actually doing a Zoom meeting this morning with a group of teachers and leaders at a Jewish agricultural school in Bet Sha'an called Chava Be'eden. And one of the things that they're thinking about, following on Einat from what you just said, is simply they're growing stuff anywhere. Let's make sure in Shnat Shmita that we give it to people in need and that we do it in a particular kind of a way. So Daniel, Yakir, Dyonna, as we all look forward to the coming Shmita year, this could be tiny or it could be huge. What are the things that you think that we can, could, or should be thinking about as a way to observe Shnat Shmita, the Shmita year? Don't be shy, Daniel, you're up.
So I think in previous years, and maybe our last meeting was an example of that, we felt a real need to reinterpret
Daniel, this is the problem with Torah Sinai, because your screen is frozen. Daniel's going to come back. We're going to wait for him. Yakir or Dyonna? Oh, Daniel, you're back up, but you need to demute. You froze.
I don't know what that happened. It was okay. Forget. I think in previous years we felt the need to reinterpret Shmita to try and make it relevant. And this year it really feels to me we should start with the nuts and bolts of what Shmita was originally about and still is about. I mean, the fact is it's going to be a year where we need to think about people who have, the people who Shmita was intended to help is people who are living close to the edge. And tragically, we have so many people who are living close to the edge, and debt alleviation, loan forgiveness, subsidizing basic staples, thinking about what it might mean to engage in career retraining programs for people who have been put on furlough and simply can't think of a way to get back onto their original career track. I don't think we should lose sight of it. That it's not a reason not to think creatively, but I think that's really the nuts and the bolts. The second thing I think about when we're coming out of Corona is Shmita as an opportunity for community building, and community building that's relating to the land. I mean, one of the things, both through the foundation work that I'm doing and just generally, you see the power of placemaking, this idea of finding common spaces that bring everyone together and that common endeavor. So we won't be planting a garden during Shmita year, but we'll be doing all sorts of other things in these shared spaces that are available to everyone. If we start thinking a little bit further out, one of the things I've been thinking about is shared spaces, and what does it mean to have Shmita for other shared spaces that are not necessarily earth shared spaces? And one of them, of course, is digital shared spaces. And what does a Shmita in relation to virtual society actually mean? And when you were speaking, Nigel, I'm tempted. I don't know. We've spent a year, including now, glued to our screens. Is there a possibility that we would wrap our laptops up in newspaper and not touch them for a year? I think that would probably be pretty demanding. But thinking about what a thoughtful halacha of the screen might look like. And maybe one of the ways to think about it is to try and separate commercial use from interpersonal use, to think about what are the commercial dimensions of this space, and can we constrain them? There was a beautiful idea at one stage, I think it came up in the discussion we had in London, of taking, at the time, the idea was to take billboards and have a year without advertising. And all the billboards would be full of art and poetry and creativity. And maybe that's something that we could think about on the digital space as well. It's interesting, as Einat said, these are not easy things to tackle commercially, but the original Shmita was also not easy. It's interesting. 7 years is an amazing year for setting is an amazing period of time for setting personal goals, by the way. I mean, you can tackle something big. And at the moment, in my own small way, I'm doing Daf Yomi, which is the 1 page a day of studying the Gemara. I think, but you could learn it. I would love the Jewish world to take learning Hebrew as a Shmita goal. And I would love Israel at the same time to take learning Arabic as a goal during the same period. I just think it would be an incredible thing on both sides. But I mention this just because yesterday in the page of the Gemara that I was studying, there was a reference to Shmita. And it talked about something that I didn't know, which is at the time of Shmita, they arranged the calendar so there could not be a leap year, either in Shmita or the year that followed. And it's so interesting because it's a beautiful idea, Shmita, but let's not go overboard with it. You can have too much of it. Adding an extra month is going to make it unworkable. So you're walking something of a fine line. But I think we should definitely be challenging ourselves. Other things that I think we could be doing. If I was an advertising executive, I think I would say that Shmita needs a brand. And I would say what it needs most of all, first of all, it needs a color. And secondly, it needs a song. And first of all, as a color, I'm thinking what makes Shabbat so special? Shabbat has its color white. It has its songs that we only sing on Shabbat, and we all know and we can connect to them when we wait for them. And so I'm thinking, first of all, for my suggestion, I'm open to other suggestions, it should be tchelet. It should be sky blue, because that is a color that we lost for 2,000 years and we rediscovered again when we came back to Israel. And somehow or other, it should be a color that should infuse the year. And we should have, I don't know whether it would be a song or it should be a nusach. And there are songs that we only sing, or versions of the Shabbat songs that we only sing in this particular 7th year. And we should find some kind of creative way that, not just in the Jewish organization calendars, like you say, of course, but sort of emotionally, a kid that is 7 and then afterwards when he's 14 remembers the songs that he heard before, and somehow it sort of builds into his psyche.
So Daniel, first of all, thank you for that. And not only thank you, but there's no question publicly, we now warmly invite you personally and your talented kids and family work on a little bit of that branding and to work on one of those songs. I think we'll have the chance.
My contribution to the next Shmita, I'm going to tell you, my main contribution is that I am not going to sing the Shmita song. I think that would be a major contribution on my part, but I will get the kids to work on it.
Well, I will just take that moment just before we go to Dyonna and Yakir, and this was partly in the title of this session. 7 years ago, as people have heard, we published the Shmita source book. We did a translation of Shabbat Haaretz. We did a Shmita summit in London. This time around, the week after next, we're going to launch a series of Shmita prizes. I'm going to say very publicly, everything in Jewish life has a ritual, except for Shmita. We have Shabbat candles, we have a Pesach Seder, we have Lulav and Etrog, and we're actually going to invite people to create entries in 5 different categories. One of them is going to be a ritual object. What would it be to have a Seder plate on our table at Rosh Hashanah? And by the way, is it just for the start of the Shemitah year, or is it every day or every Shabbat during the Shemitah year, or is it every Rosh Hashanah? On the first day of the Shemitah year, it has 7 objects on it, and the next year it just has 1 because it's the first year. We're going to invite people to produce fine art, to have a category of video following on from the work that Einat did 7 years ago, performance art, liturgy or music, and then finally writing, not just poetry and fiction, but also prose, essays and ideas. So in being in this session right now, you have a 2-week heads up on that before we announce it publicly. I'll put it in the link in a minute. The website is not public yet, we're still working on it, but there is a website, Shmita Project, which is a public website. Any person can be part of it, any organization can put materials on it. Any event at all that's happening anywhere about Shmita, we will post on it and promote on it. And it's where there is going to be information also about the Shmita prizes. I'm going to go for Dyonna and Yakir for things you want to add. And then I really want to throw it open for people for ideas or questions. Dyonna, Yakir, anything you want to add at this point?
I'm happy to go. Einat spoke about the dystopian part of the world that we're currently inhabiting and how it's sort of a dystopian version of Shemitah. But I do think it's worth noting that, in 2014 or in 2007, when I was at the Shemitah gatherings, it was unthinkable that the world would stop. The notion that the patterns of consumption and production would come to a screeching halt was totally outside of the bounds of our imagination. And that is a window of possibility. I was actually on a big, bold Climate Fest session last week where someone shared this amazing essay by the Indian novelist Arundhati Roy called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And in it, she basically says that nothing could be worse than a return to normality. And so for me, one of the major questions I'm asking is, what are the parts of this year that we do want to take with us moving forward? A reconnection to nature, a recalibration of how we show up at work, and realizing that, yes, many of us have had to hold a very difficult work-life balance this year, but the fact that we're able to be our authentic selves and show what's going on in the background where we have to hide that normally, how do we carry that forward in the coming, in the Shemitah cycle? So that's one thing that I'm thinking about. And just some other pieces, I'll go in radiating circles from the individual to the institutional to the national and communal. So on an individual level, I have to admit that as someone who is halachically observant, living in the state of Israel, I've often tried to avoid the halachot of Shemitah. I won't go into the details of the various politics involved, but there are ways to get through the Shemitah year without having to deal with the headache so much. And one of the things that I am committing myself to going into this coming year is actually not to find those loopholes that make my life easier, but to actually embrace the concept of Shemitah in its full sort of weight, to enable the halachic system to to allow me to experience it fully. So that's on an individual level. On an institutional level, one of the parts of OLAM's work pre-corona that was just key to what we do was convenings, in-person global convenings. And I have to say that we have a real question right now whether, what we do when in-person convenings are now become a reality again, and whether we can take a stand on reducing our carbon footprint and what that looks like. So on an institutional level, trying to say, what does it look like to recalibrate some of the things that we've always known we should be thinking about differently. On a national level in Israel, some of the most exciting initiatives, and Einat knows about this better, but last Shmita year is you actually had Knesset members, Ruth Calderon, who comes from the secular Beit Midrash world, was a Knesset member at the time and tried to pass legislation with a broadened definition of what Shmita is like. There were conversations in terms of the national parks movement in Israel about having national parks be free during the Shmita year. And so there is a unique opportunity in the state of Israel to be thinking about progressive pieces of legislation that are rooted in some of the core values of Shmita. And I hope that there are activists who are already thinking about how we can do that. And then on the communal level, I would say one of the things that's been fascinating for me about Shmita work is that it is one of the few things I know of that can bring together and does bring together people who not only come from very different geographic backgrounds, but religious and political backgrounds. Many of the Shmita freaks, in the most endearing, sense of the word, in Israel are people. Increasingly there are those who are interested in this broader definition, but are people who come from a religious nationalist camp. And many of the Shmita freaks, who are doing some of this more creative work, both in Israel and beyond, are those who are coming from a much more progressive camp. And there's something that is unbelievably generative and exciting. And it is one of the few issues that I know of in the Jewish world that can actually bring people together who are so different in their politics and religious affiliations. And so I really hope that this coming Shmita year that we're leveraging that fully.
Anna, thank you for that. And before we go to Yakira, I'd be remiss also. Lisa Colton put a link in the chat to the Arundhati Roy essay. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, in relationship, Daniel, to what you said about digital space, that Lisa Colton played the key role in creating the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest, which is itself a way of using, as it were, digital space to bring people together across differences of geography, religion, organizational differences, and a reminder of the possibility of playing out some of these values creatively. Yakir.
Thank you. I just first have to say how much I'm enjoying this and how much I miss being in Shmita Chavruta with all of you, and how generative and nourishing this is to discuss together. And I do want to just name it or echo the observation that there has been such disruption and such new possibilities that no one could imagine that society could shut down. And obviously it's for tragic reasons and really hard realities we're all dealing with. But it is also showing us that change is possible. And, Shmita is already a frame that is aspirational. The kind of reset on land rest and debt release is already, revolutionary. But I want to suggest that we should also think about the Yovel, the Jubilee framework, because the kind of massive societal disruption and questions that are being asked right now really feel, this is a once in 100-year pandemic, please God, we won't see it ever again. But there is deep disruption that has occurred. And that 50-year cycle you know, and so part of me that thinks that there has been this disruption and reset potentially this year makes me think that maybe this coming Shemitah year also can be thought of as a Yovel, a Jubilee year as well. And I want to echo Diana's framework of the 3 levels of sort of individual home, family level, the public policy or sort of national level and the communal level. On an individual level, I think, you know, just the ability to make time now to step back and call time out, you know, to be able to think about what we want out of our lives. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher in the Sefer Habrit writes, the liberation from the yoke of work would give them the opportunity for studying Torah and wisdom. Folks might be occupied with crafts and building. Those endowed with special skills will invent new methods in this free time for the benefit of the world. Right? So what does that look like for each of us? Not just R&D for our companies or who we work with, but what is the R&D of our soul, of our home, of our life that we want to be able to do together? And I think that can only come from being in chavruta with our spouse, with ourselves, with, you know, folks in our home. On the most national level, I really want to underscore Daniel's point that this is about justice, resetting towards a just and sustainable society. And Torah established that as fundamentally economic justice. And we see in our world today that economic justice cannot happen without racial justice, and it cannot happen without climate justice. So to have a focus on racial, economic, and climate justice during the Shemitah year is fundamentally aligned with this work at a big level. You know, I've heard people say lately, go big or lose small. And when we think about the public level, the national level, I want to endorse that framework. And then, you know, perhaps the level that many of us are operating in this more sort of communal and institutional level. So I want to encourage everybody to start now just by having conversations about it with individuals you work with or collaborate with. The learning and the dialogue, the thought experiment around this is so enriching and valuable in and of itself to ask these questions. And then I want to share a couple, you know, more specific things. One is on inauguration night, January 20th, a group of friends and I created a ceremony ritual that we called American Havdalah, because we felt like we needed to make some separation, and we shared what had gone on over the last 4 years that was hard and painful and trauma that we needed to name, what was the hope and strength that brought us through this time, and what were our intentions and hopes moving forward. And so I want to just offer that, and then we didn't do exactly Havdalah, we made some blessings, we're outside and safe and everything, but I think there's an opportunity to really create creative ritual that I am really inspired by. And I also want to name, if folks have ever heard of or been to a barter fair, have you heard of this? Like you go somewhere and it's a toy swap or book swap, or in Jewish communities, particularly Orthodox communities, the idea of a gamach, where there are like resources that you can loan and it's free and you share. Like, how do we invest in these structures that in some cases already exist that could be multiplied exponentially to strengthen the gift economy, the collective investing in shefa, abundance, and sharing, to go from a sense of scarcity to a sense of abundance. And I think Jim Farley said in the comments, right, how do we cultivate that Shemitah culture? The last point I want to make is I want to ask us to also think about what is the end of the Shemitah year? How can this time be generative and then inform how we enter the next period of time, really with hopefully with a newfound sense of clarity and strength and motivation for the years to come.
Yakia, thank you so much. There are so many rabbis and environmentalists and farmers and organizational leaders on this call. Just briefly, I really invite, first of all, anybody in the chat, put down right now something that you're thinking about or inspired by, provoked by, imagining. And secondly, I invite anybody who wants to, just briefly, go ahead and unmute yourself and just share. I don't even think we're going to do questions. The panelists have said many things that have provoked us and inspired us in wonderful ways. I want to hear from a few other folks. Go ahead and just demute and share one thing that you're thinking about, that you could be doing, we could be doing, our institutions should be doing.
I'll start if anyone can hear me. So in Potomac, Maryland, I'm trying to get a 27-acre property to be used as a community do-it-yourself garden for regenerative agriculture and organic gardening, with lots that have everything donated directly to the different local nonprofits that are working on reducing food insecurity.
Thank you. Amazing. Somebody else, something you're thinking about, provoked by Michael.
Yeah, it's a good spelling of my first name by accident. So I've been a Jewish farmer since starting with a diaspora kibbutz 48 years ago, 49 years. So, but before that, several people on this call were part of a group called Shomer Hachadash. And so the question comes up with, this is very nice, but what are the political implications? For instance, and sadly, Israel is not very good on these issues, but the use of, in Shmita, the use of GMOs, pesticides, chemicals, things like atrazine that are poisoning the land, poisoning the people, poisoning our endocrine system. Shouldn't we be aware of the necessity to speak out, especially to our general assemblies and our county councils, as part of our concepts and our ethics about agriculture as Jews? And Shakir and I spoke about this before last year's Jewish Farmers Network conference, which is taking place right now. But still, we don't extend ourselves in agriculture towards speaking out forcefully about poisoning the earth, poisoning the land, and poisoning us, especially with chemicals like I've mentioned before, atrazine, interrupting the endocrine, breast cancer, uterine cancer. Keeping silent on this issue and just raising food, while it's a good thing, could be considered a negative contribution.
Thank you. And Jim, I don't know if you have your hand up, but if you do, you're up. And somebody called Scott, you had your hand up, you're up.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And I see so many good friends, and I'm so excited to listen to this conversation. I have to share it with you. It is reminiscent of the first conversation, a real deep conversation I listened to. I was really a outsider listening in on a conversation that was at Pearlstone at the Shabbaton, that agricultural Shabbaton that I participated in. And I had met Yakir in a tour of Jewish farms around the country and community farms around the country. I endorse Daniel's comments about shared space. For those of you who know our work, I'm a big advocate of it. It's so important, and even to this conversation, and I wanted to follow on to a comment that Yakir made. The conversations that we're having today are so rich. I'm frustrated they're only an hour and a hour long. It needs to be a much longer conversations. In fact, we should breaking out and listing some ideas and sort of having a process that replicates, that we can replicate in a very local sense to sort of bring this conversation home, give some architecture to it. I think our conversations, yes, there's a lot of reason for personal engagement. We'll come back together. But I want to challenge ourselves, and when we do that, to think in terms of our Shemitah offset. We need to be able to integrate the rest of the world in these conversations virtually. So don't do something that doesn't include everybody. And for those, there's need for the creatives and the social creatives to get together in space to up the ante. We should have a Shemitah Institute where this conversation is ongoing, and we come back and come together with some structure in space that, by the way, sort of is architecture for Peah. Where in our communities is there architecture in our food system for the poor and the stranger? Where are our tools for welcoming the stranger? We're going to welcome 180 million climate refugees in other parts of the world. Where are the tools going to come from to welcome them in a humane and dignified way? We need to lead the charge. It can't be a once in a while conversation. I'm gonna get off because I know I usually consume too much oxygen, and I apologize for it.
Jim, I'm gonna take that as a final comment because it was appropriately ambitious and challenging, and truthfully, exactly what we wanted from this panel. Really seriously, I say this just for me personally, there were a couple of moments that I was moved to tears. I want to be provoked. I want to be challenged. I want to believe that Jewish tradition is complex and not easy. I want to share, going both to what Yakir said about justice and what Dyonna said about traveling. One of the things that we've been working on recently is a proposal for one of the big federations in North America and saying, what would it be to use the Shmita year to flesh out a 7-year vision for your entire community around environmental sustainability? Meaning, what is the education that we deliver? What is the power that we use, the food that we consume? How do we, to what extent do we travel? And if we do travel, how do we offset it? What are the interfaith relations? And so on and so forth. Like, Shmita is absolutely both a provocation and an inspiration in relationship to the content, and a frame in relationship to time. I want to share with everybody privately, this also hasn't been agreed, but Jim, in terms of you saying we need more time, we're potentially planning to do a half day of learning on Shmita with Limud USA. And so that'll include learning from across the country, teachers from across the country. And so I want to say, it's not live yet, but I'm again just going to put in here, shmitaproject.org is not only a place where there is always going to be information and ideas, but if you have things that you want to do, if there are materials that you want to post, ideas, questions, videos, then let us know. If you're interested in creating or submitting something for the Shmita Prizes, information on that is going to be out the week after next. And most of all, I really genuinely, I want to thank every single one of you for being here, for thinking about this, for allowing us to get our juices going. Dyonna, Einat, Yakir, Daniel, thank you so much for being with us. I absolutely believe in ending on time, but I'm going to allow each one of you a sort of like a 1-sentence last word. Einat and then Dyonna.
Just want to thank you. Nigel, you are right. It was an amazing evening. I enjoyed myself so much. And I'm now really excited. Look forward to start to keep on working about the next sabbatical year. And I want to tell to everybody, as you can hear, my English is not amazing, but I really like to chat about Shmita. So everybody who has an idea about collaboration with Israel, we are working about it now, and you can write me. I will be happy to talk.
So about Dyonna and then Yakir.
I'm reminded of this beautiful midrash of Rabbi Akiva seeing water wear away a rock, and say that if water can wear away a rock, Torah can wear away our hard hearts. And I'm just so moved hearing everybody. And this is a long game. And I just want to thank everybody for being that water to wear away at the rock and at our hearts. And it does feel like it's a growing stream.
Thank you, Yakir, and then Daniel, the last word.
And amen, Dyonna. Such a pleasure. Nigel, I assume it's still available, so I want to recommend to everybody. Shabbat Haaretz, Chazon put out a translation of the introduction that Rabbi Yedidya Sinclair did. Really beautiful, profound, I think foundational Shemitah text for our time. And I want to say that the teaching of Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, that we are all interdependent and interconnected, like with that inspiration, may we move forward at the pace that makes sense for each of us in our unique local context, from strength to strength.
Thank you. And Shabbat Haaretz is now on the Shmita Project website, and it's free, and you can simply download it. Daniel, very last word. You're on mute. A metaphor.
There we are. Yeah. What an incredible, energizing gathering. There's so much to take away. If I had to choose one thing, a phrase that's still echoing in my head, it's actually Yakir, based on Rav Tzvi Kalisha talking about the R&D department of the soul, which is an incredible phrase. And it made me think of a connection that I hadn't thought, because there's something else in Jewish tradition that's called Shabbat, which is Yom Kippur, which is Shabbat Shabbaton. And one of the ideas of Yom Kippur is that we actually reenact our own death so that when we get to that final stage, that won't be the first time we have those regrets that we didn't do the things we wanted to with our life. And it occurred to me that there's something very Shmita-ish about this, which is this is a chance for us to be the other people that we could have been. It's a chance for us to explore the different careers we could have had. We can have the different type of society, the different type of organization. It's an invitation to not mourn, but to actually live those untried paths. And I think it's an extraordinarily beautiful and empowering idea. And thank you so much, Nigel. Thank you to the panel members. I hope it's not another 7 years till we all meet again.
Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.